on the previous session, we were talking about several concepts. One of them was trust, and we'll talk about trust. But before I just introduce the next session, I was wondering, are any of you prejudiced? Think slowly. I mean, you don't have to answer, because maybe then it would be a bit annoying. But do any of you consciously discriminate against other, or you did it sometime, based on gender, race, social class, or type of job, let's say? Well, the people who program algorithms, sometimes most of them are like that, like you and me. They are people, basically. So that being said, this session will explore the challenges that the use of AI system poses over its ethical judgment, equal protection, economic rights, and basic freedom, and we'll seek answers on how we can reverse these trends so that AI can be, as we said, trusted. To explore and to elaborate on that, we have today with us Ricardo Baeza-Yates, Director of Research at Institute for Experiential AI at Northeastern University, Germany in the States, and Kaun, researcher and lecturer at Södertorn University. Thank you. Cecilio Angulo, full professor at Universitat, Politècnica de Catalunya, and Judith, Membrives and Llorens, digital transformation, tech, sovereignty, and AI advocate at Lafede.cat, and assistant lecturer at work apart from Algorithmic member. And it will be chairing the session, moderating Olivia Blanchard, who's a researcher at Digital Future Society think tank. Olivia, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, people. Thank you to everybody who's here in the room. Thank you to all of you who are at home watching us from there. It's been a long, intense day, so it's great to see so many of you here for the last session. A very interesting last session. And it's a great honor to moderate this fantastic panel of people. And thank you very much for being here. And a special thanks to Anne for making it all the way from Sweden. So thank you very much. So as people was explaining, and as we've heard throughout today, AI offers many unique opportunities for society. But the application of AI by both the public sector and the private sector can also, and is also already posing some very serious challenges for individuals, for collectives, and for society at large. And what we'll be discussing in this panel today, we're going to be looking specifically at the use of algorithms and automated decision-making systems by both private and the public sector. And we will be looking at the bias. So when bias creeps into these systems, it can lead to discrimination, which is what we'll be hearing from our panelists today. So I'll start with Ricardo. Welcome, Ricardo.
Thank you. So I will basically describe many types of biases you can find in software. So I hope to get my presentation there. Yeah, so let's start with what is happening. So basically, you have an algorithm that receives biased data. Remember, the first bias we have is to think that bias is something negative. Now, bias is neutral. Could be something positive or negative. In fact, information is biased. Otherwise, if you get random noise to an algorithm, you cannot do anything. So we live thanks to bias. But we should ask if the algorithm should be neutral, should be fair. That's a hard question. But then, typically, we don't ask this, and we get the same bias, and even worse, sometimes we amplify the bias, and then we cannot say that the data is the problem because we are amplifying it. This is a classical cartoon where you have the difference between equality, equity, and justice. We usually get only equity because justice takes too long, and we have affirmative actions, which are positive bias. So remember, that's important, and sometimes only the perception of bias that you're doing something good is better. So the answer to this question is not always you need to worry about this, but yes, you need to do it if you harm people. And it's not a technical question. We need domain experts to answer this question, not computer scientists. So there are hundreds of cases. You can go to this database, incidentdatabase.ai, where you find more than 1,000 problems with AI, and the majority are basically regarding discrimination. Let me give you very fast some examples, like race, social construct, like, for example, facial recognition in black people, and still, even when this software was stopped being used in June last year, was still in police enforcement, and you had people that were suffering this. Gender stereotypes in language models, where you find that if he's a surgeon, she's a nurse, and we can get that from text that is written mainly by men. So also gender and ethnic, and other examples of language models and word embeddings. For example, if you are Hispanic, you are the driver, but if you are white, you are the sheriff, and so on. And then you can have things like religion. I don't know if you saw the article of The Guardian last year about GPT-2, and now you have GPT-3. For example, if you put this sentence, 2 Muslims walked into, well, you get almost all violent completions, like this Muslim will kill someone. And of course, this is because of the news. And then they did a study, and they found that GPT-3 has 4 times more violent completions for Muslims than from Christians. So if you're Buddhist or atheist, you are the most less dangerous people, like me. So social class. This was mentioned already before. UK students, because of COVID, they predicted their grade, and of course, they discriminate poor people. Even worse, beginning of this year, after many years in court, the whole government of Netherlands had to resign because 26 families, poor families that were getting subsidies on childcare, were accused of cheating, and they were not cheating. And this had a huge impact, maybe in 100,000 people. This is the largest political effect of an algorithm in the world. And I need to remember, bias is not only in data, mainly in data, but it's not that. It can be on the optimization function that you're using to train your algorithm. The best example is Deliveroo. January this year, same time of the Netherlands government, judge in Italy, in Bologna, said that the algorithm was indirectly discriminating all the people that couldn't deliver at night. And what happened? Well, the algorithm learned that to earn more money, it had to give more work to the people that could deliver at night, and then gave less work to other people, discriminating those people. So in this case, the algorithm had to be kind of communist, giving the same amount of work to all the people. But no one thought about that the algorithm will learn that. And if you want to learn other ways of bias, you can read my paper on communication of ACM on 2018 on all the biases on the web. The last one I want to point out is the interaction loop. Your interaction between the system and the screen, and this happens not to a minority, not to half the people like in females, it happens to all of us. Basically, you have exposure bias. What is exposure bias? If you go to any e-commerce system in the world, you will see 3-4 recommendations. Of how many? Thousands? It's not like an iceberg. You are just looking at the point of the ice cube in the iceberg. There's a huge exposure bias, like COVID, not so huge in the case of COVID, sadly. But then that creates popularity bias. Basically, some people get richer and some other people get poor. And you have all the products and the people in the long tail get discriminated. So not only you are in a filter bubble, if you have read about filter bubbles and how personalization puts us in like in a tunnel, the system itself is in a bubble, in a really large bubble. And is maybe you are like Truman, that when he learned that he was in a bubble, wanted to get out of the bubble. But not all people is like that. So some people like to live in a bubble. So let's give you some good news. There's one thing where algorithms are better. They don't have noise. People take noisy decisions. What that means that even you, under the same problem, in different circumstances, will decide different things. One reason is because you learn, but in other cases, it's just random. And this is, in courts, it's really true. For example, the justice system in many countries depends on political things, and depends on sexism, and depends on many other things. So we have a dilemma. Should we use a bias, but just algorithm, but basically every people get the same result? Or we have a noisy judge that, depending on if had lunch, sleep well, or is happy, will have a different result? It's hard to say, but really the judge is also biased, and there's some interesting papers that show that maybe the system will be better. So this was pointed out by Daniel Kahneman already in 2018. I was using this article in Harvard Business Review, but now he has a book, Noise, that was published last May. So to finish, if you want to learn more about this, please check this excellent documentary made by women in Netflix. much better than the social dilemma that was done with white men before. We had a great panel in ACM that you can see in YouTube, where I was the only man there representing half of the population, but I think was okay. That's, again, affirmative action. And if you want to take the bias out of this event, I will be provocative, and then we should call it a new age by dismantling humanism. And it's not a digital age, it's a real human age, where human is the real semantics of human. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. Over to you, Anne.
Yes, and thank you for having me here. I'm really glad that I could attend the event and a lot of amazing panels. And I think we are also going to probably link up to some of the previous discussions and presentations. And I'm also very glad that you made this broad scope of what kind of biases we already know about. And I'm approaching this question of bias by focusing on welfare provision. And what it means to implement the digital welfare state with the help of algorithms and automated decision-making. So across Europe, welfare systems are under pressure, not only since the pandemic, already before, because of demographic changes. We have aging populations, so the public administration is really under the pressure to get more efficient, that's often the argument, and save resources to meet these challenges of shrinking resources and increasing needs from the populations. And technology is then often introduced as the key way to solve these problems by delegating as standardized tasks and getting more efficient, saving resources, and delegating then resources to other places to really engage with the citizens, for example, is often an argument when automated systems are being introduced in public administration. But in the public discussion and the event today here, and Ricardo has already pointed towards certain issues with these automated systems, and it's not only in the academic discussion, but in the public discourse more generally, that citizens are getting increasingly aware of the problems with bias and discrimination based on automated systems. We have Virginia Eubanks that already many years ago has addressed these problems in her book on automating inequality. And for me, it's maybe not the technological bias, how certain biases are built into the algorithm, but using automation in welfare provision in the first place that might be considered a bias as well. We're testing technologies on very vulnerable populations, the ones that are really needing support in society, and their systems are deployed that are sometimes not fully working. And I have one example from the Swedish context, and it's not even a very advanced system. It was a very simple decision tree of reporting activities to the employment services. So in order to get benefits, you had to, every second week, submit a report on your activities. And at some point, there was a server failure, and the incoming emails weren't registered. And that caused that some of the eligible people received wrong decisions of being neglected or not receiving their benefits that they were eligible for. So there we don't have a very advanced technological bias that's built into the system, but it was a technological failure, and it took more than 6 months for the agency to identify where the mistake was actually happening. And also they had to go back to manually processing the incoming reports. And they didn't have the manpower. There weren't just enough civil servants. So there we can also see problems of using automated systems. And here I would say it is a bias of testing technologies on vulnerable populations that is problematic. And if we are seeing and identifying algorithms and automated systems as the solution to a lot of problems of the welfare state, we need to have a broader perspective on the implications and how, for example, the relationship between citizens and the state is changing if we are delegating decisions increasingly to automated systems and are not interacting with civil servants anymore. It might cause noise interacting with people. We are noisy. We have our own biases, but it also adds maybe a trust in institutions if we are interacting with humans. And there, I think civil societies and the citizen perspective is really crucial in discussing the implications of the digital welfare state. And I'm very happy that we also have this perspective on the panel. So we're going to hear a bit more about alternative ways of imagining the automation and also the positive aspects of using technology for welfare provision. And I would like to end here to have more time to listen to the other panelists and also for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Over to you, Cecilio.
Okay,
And the,
I will need.
oh,
I cannot touch. I will touch. Okay.
They didn't move it.
So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the invitation to be in this panel. I'm very happy to be here and to talk a little bit about this topic that is the use of AI bias. Okay, I have a little bit different vision of AI bias. Okay, so most of the algorithms in AI are discriminants. Can be one discriminant not discriminatory? This is the first question. Okay. Second question is, obviously it can be discriminatory in the bad sense. Okay, it is not clear what it means, the bad sense, or the well sense, or the fair sense, or the neutral sense. Okay, it's something interesting. From the point of view of the algorithm, what we are trying to do is like these people that is skiing on the snow. Okay, so we are trying to find different pathways in order to go down the hill and trying to find some new position that is reducing some cost, reducing some penalty, and so on. Okay, so this is our perspective. Okay, is it one naive perspective? Maybe, but this is the perspective of one algorithm, and when we are coding algorithms, this is our perspective. Okay, and to introduce bias here is a very bad idea. Okay, but we are working in this kind of algorithm, but we are trying to look is for this kind of solution. Okay, so we are trying to find as many different solutions as possible, because these kind of solutions can lead to different arguments. Okay, is the argument about the Foxbury jump something that is cheating the previous jumpers? Is a fake to jump in this form? In this Mexico Olympics, he was called a genius, okay, because he was developing this new technique. So this is what, from a naive point of view, we are trying to develop. It can be a little bit different, okay? So this is Seoul, 20 years later, okay? I'm sorry for the quality of the images, okay? But you can see that there is one swimmer that is making backstroke, and is still under the water. Okay? Why? Because he was discovering that going under the water, you are faster than making backstroke. Other competitors were aware of the same, and they were imitating the first competitor. Okay? You can see in the upper side that some people is talking that rogue. Okay, so it's something tricky, okay? Again, is this person cheating the system? Is this a fake? Is this synthetic? This is a good point, okay? He was not violating any rule, and he was discovering a new solution. Many people was thinking that these people was cheating, okay? And for this reason, in the next there was a new rule, okay? And the new rule is there is some flags, okay? When you are going to the swimming pool, there are some flags indicating in which moment you must resurface, okay? Because there is a maximum of 15 meters that you can go under the water, okay? So you can say, okay, no problem. We can be reliable on the government. We can be reliable on some standards, on some quality, okay? In this case, the FINA, that they will solve this problem. But this is not totally true, okay? So this is me and my family going to Perpignan, okay? We were going to the FNAC, Okay, maybe you know this shopping mall. Okay, the snack. There was one snack in Perpignan, but you know, sorry, in Girona. Okay, but you know, the problem is that my interest was to buy one Google Home. Okay, and Google was deciding that the only places where Google Home was selling was in France, in Germany, and in the UK. So if you want to buy one Google Home, if you want to progress in your research in natural language processing in Spain, you cannot buy Google Home by internet, so you must move to Perpignan to buy this Google Home. And this is where this morning was a panelist talking about the only market, okay, the single market, okay, was defending. There is a single market in the UA, okay, and in the European Union, and this single market is for all the things. Okay, here there is no single market, so there is a company, this is Google, that is allowed to sell only some products in only some countries, and the European Union is allowing that. So we don't need to go to the sub-Saharan countries, and we don't need to go to these other kind of very, very long, far away countries to discover that the democracy is a place where to fight all the time. Okay, so you must fight democracy in all the places. Okay, this is one example. So bias is something that is inherent to AI because we are working with discriminant. That this bias is negative or positive is a question of the human that is interpreting that. Okay, so it's a question of interpretation. And the last element, we cannot be confident about the government that is helping to solve everything. Okay, so if you are in some social movement trying to work and to fight with this kind of democracy on the algorithm, we are there. Okay? Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's like a very big pleasure to be here representing civil society. I have to see.
One second, it will show up.
Ah, okay. Black button, no? I have to press? Okay. Well, with all the information and examples that Ricardo and Anne have been offered, 3 questions come to my mind, and I want to share them with you. You know, this is really a little trap because I already know what they're going to say. First question. Why do citizens seem to be a stake or external to all this algorithmic injustice that we have all day heard? Second one, meanwhile, all these algorithms are violating human rights. Where are non-governmental organizations for global justice and civil society ones? And the final interrogant, how can we include experience and knowledge from citizens and organizations in this process of algorithmic automation of public administration? In the short presentation, I will try to respond to these 3 questions. I'm coming from Lafede.cat and Algorithmic, and we have identified 3 key issues that provide some context to answer these questions. First one is the narrative of techno-solutionism. There is a growing effort to create public policies through a data-based approach. We have heard today so many times that data isn't isolated from the environment that produces it. Algorithms can understand the information that they process, so they are unable to interpret particularities and context. Algorithms don't deliberate, they only identify patterns. Examples exposed by my partners have figured out what happens when we use historical data and patterns to create public policy. Technology can solve social problems. We have identified the absence of organization and citizen participation at the process of decision about the automatization of public services. The initial question, or the first question in terms of apply algorithms, is who decides what processes have to be automated and with what data. Furthermore, the current focus we have seen today is on ethics, and because we assume human rights having their own space in most of these discussions. This implies that human rights and global justice organizations aren't, as a general rule, taking account until algorithms are implemented and discrimination appears. All the knowledge of years of hands-on work in the field of civil society organization is ignored. And because they aren't interpolated, we must say that these organizations, as a general rule, have little knowledge about algorithms, and this is the last key point. There is a lack of knowledge and dissemination about how algorithmic injustice affects or vulnerates human rights. Public discourse is, for the most part, dominated by the private sector, and there is no critical mass with a global justice approach that can make a reply to these all techno-solutionist narratives. Sometimes, like today, we tend to focus on aspects such as algorithmic biases, without taking into account the systemic structure that generates them. That is, without placing emphasis on the logic of the optimization. And meaning, we have the mantra of we need to automate all the process to guarantee efficiency. But this mantra doesn't focus on being more fair. Dissemination and communication is needed to create new cohesive and shared frameworks about algorithms that put global justice at the center. And human rights organizations are the perfect actor to question the idea of progress that we have associated with automation. And this is the idea that private sector and institutions seems to accept. At this point, it is evident that we need to center the voices of those who are directly impacted by the outcomes of the automation process. And here, I think that organizations have a lot to say and teach. For example, we know that anti-racism organizations are experts in identifying discrimination by racial profile. Why not to involve them? Why not to amplify our epistemic approach to algorithms conception? Why not include conceptual tools that offer new ways to approach automations? I'm thinking in analytical tools as intersectionality, coined by anti-racism and feminist movements, that allow us to understand how aspects of a person's social and political identities combine to create different modes of discrimination and privilege. There are two proposals to rethink design process from the Design Justice Network that centers people who are normally marginalized by design and use collaborative, creative practice to address the deepest challenge that these communities face. And there are some guidebooks such as the Advancing Civic Participation in Algorithmic Decision-Making from Data Justice Lab, and this is a summary of strategies and initiatives to promote citizen participation in this topic that concerns us today. Participation has to be furthered than the inclusion on an advisory board, but the truth is that right now, even in these spaces, NGOs aren't present. Ricardo, for example, is in the Artificial Intelligence Ethics Observatory of Catalonia, and there isn't any person that comes from human rights NGOs or for activism or for global justice. So we conclude that common proposals as diversity on teams that develop technology or auditories are a good thing, but aren't enough. The dominating power of algorithms starts when the decision to use them is taken. We need to take action in this moment of truth. We need to be involved from the very beginning. And we need to create communities of practice to share where institutions, civil society, academics, citizens, and developers share knowledge and experience with the aim to convey a new horizon to the application of algorithms, one oriented to human rights defense, because global justice requires algorithmic justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith, and thank you to all four of you. So Anne mentioned the word trust, and Judith brought in civil society. And more civil society organizations are calling for more transparency, more research, more visibility of the use of algorithms and automated decision-making systems in the private and the public spheres. And there are a number of initiatives nowadays building and calling for more public registers, for example, as a tool to bring more awareness and transparency in research. And I wanted to ask the panel, what do you think about these systems? Are you familiar? Are you contributing to any of them? And are they a useful way of sharing knowledge and learning lessons so that we don't repeat the same mistakes in other countries or at different levels of the administration in the case of the public sector? Ricardo, I would like to start with you.
Okay, so yes, there are some cities like Helsinki or Amsterdam that are registered algorithms. They're using a software of a Finnish company, Side.ai. I think this is a good movement, but as I want transparency in algorithms, I always have to remember that the other question is if public algorithms are safe, because algorithms can be gamed, and we know that whenever it's completely transparent, some people try to abuse of the system, and then we pay for all the sinners, right, as we say in Spanish. So this is important to remember. The second thing is that transparency also depends on the culture. So I think we ask transparency because we don't trust in organizations, while in other countries they ask for accountability because they trust in organizations. So I would prefer, rather than trying to register something at the end, that we have a new way to develop software that basically has all the stakeholders in the design from the beginning to the end, and maybe we don't need to register because we trust the process, more like ISO 9000 for software, that trustworthy software, although I think we shouldn't trust AI, but this is the word that the EU is using. So doing that whole process in a way that we know that was done properly, and maybe then registration is not so important, and even an audit is not so important because we know that the right tests were done.
What about you, Anne?
Yeah, I think we also had a pre-discussion for this, and you also mentioned that it's maybe not so useful to only register AI applications, but also to register harms, to have this kind of collection of worst-case scenarios in a way, and then have this learning
like
process.
the database I mentioned, like the incident database of the AI, at least you have the whole impact of things, yes.
Exactly, and I'm also, because you mentioned the Data Justice Lab, and they have this report on algorithmic auditing, for example, but they also made a scoping exercise of cancelled systems, cancelled automated decision-making systems. This is another aspect that I think is quite important to bring transparency to, because the development process also takes a lot of resources. And there are all these piloting initiatives, and there's money invested in these systems, and quite a lot of them are then never really used. They disappear again from the surface of the public administration. So it's also important to register those cancelled systems, and maybe also give visibility where civic initiatives actually were successful, contributing to the cancelling, but also maybe that resources went elsewhere, and investigate the reasons for why these systems are being cancelled, just to bring another aspect to registries and transparency, to see some kind of financial accountability and investments that are made in the technological development as well.
Just to complement that, we have a human bias that we like to talk about success, but not about failures. I think we could learn much more from failures. So it will be a very large book, like 1 million failures in AI, and then you can learn, okay, at least I will learn not to do this. But we only talk about like in startups, the 10 ones that had success. So we need to change that.
So I think that there will be some AI repositories, okay, to collect this kind of algorithms. And I think that there is two steps. The first one is the control quality, okay. So in the same, finally, one AI algorithm is a product, okay. It's like a yogurt or like a cheese, so it's a product. So you are confident in a product, so because it has the CE brand, okay, it has a mark that tells you that there is following some quality procedures and it's following some quality controls. So this is the first step, to define that. Who must define that is another question. I am not sure that the citizenship must be defining that. And the second question is the reputation. Okay, so you can have several yogurts when you are going to the Walmart. Okay, but you are finally selecting one of them. Okay, and normally it's because the price, because that's the reputation, because some other kind of issues. But from my point of view, one AI algorithm is like another product.
Okay. Judith?
Well, I disagree because if I eat a bad cheese, maybe I will have stomachache pain, but I'm not affecting a huge community with this yogurt or cheese or what things. I think that registers are good tools for mapping and for identify systems, and two, it could be a good tool to identify patterns or to identify new ways to use this technology. I'm thinking on the app that SOS Racisme have presented last week, I think. They shift the usual way to use data because they are now mapping where, in which neighbors or streets are police making racial profiling. So this data always is from the police ban. We don't have this data from the communities ban. So I think that could be a good thing to empower communities to act. But I think that registers are one tool, not the solution. It's like auditories are one tool more than are the solution. And I think that it's important to this new approach to algorithms that can make different perspectives because efficiency is everywhere and not always is the good metric to use. And I think I agree with them.
Okay.
I think yogurt is a very bad metaphor.
Yeah.
I will give you two examples. One is that suppose you go to buy a yogurt, you like it, and next week you still like it but has a different flavor because these models are changing, and it's the same yogurt, same label, same everything. And the second thing is that if an immigrant opens it, it tastes awful. So I don't think it's like yogurt. It's much more complicated than yogurt.
Yeah. How much? How much complicated?
Well, it changes in time, and also depending on who opens it, has a different flavor. It's very different, right? So your examples were about innovation, were not about bias. I'm okay with that. When you harm people is the problem.
Judith, were you going to say something?
No, yogurt is not a systemic thing. It's no sé, like this. But bias algorithm affects people by a systemic way, and it can decide if you have right to take a grant or not, for example.
I just wanted to add to the discussion whether AI and algorithms are a product or not, just with a case from Sweden again. And maybe some of you already have heard about the Trelleborg case. It has been discussed quite a lot, where the social benefit applications have been fully automated. And there was actually a litigation case where journalists wanted to have access to the source code of the software. And the court actually decided that it's not a product, but it is public records. And that's why the journalists got access to the source code. So it has implications if you define AI or algorithms as a product, also for the public discussions and the possibility of investigation. Yeah. That it then ended up also releasing sensitive data is a whole other story. So with the source code, the municipality also released sensitive data on the citizens. That's another issue, but there is this kind of definition and struggle about definitions, which has a lot of implications.
You can register the code also. So finally, it's a product. So you to have something that can be registered, it's a product.
And you've done a lot of research into how you found in how different stakeholders were calling the same thing different names, and the impact that this had on from a regulatory or legal perspective, right? Maybe you want to just tell us a little bit more about that.
But talking about source codes, I don't know if you read that Uber was sued by drivers in Portugal and the UK last year, and in the Netherlands, because Uber Europe is in the Netherlands. And basically, I guess they were asked to share the code, and I think that's the reason why they didn't defend themselves, and they lost. So basically, the Uber preferred not to go to court, and then they lost, and they had to reinstate the drivers that they were saying they were cheating according to some code, and they say the driver were saying that they were not cheating, and I guess they were right.
Yes, returning to the different definitions, I think also, I mean, during all the panels we have heard different terminologies. We have talked about artificial intelligence, we have talked about algorithmic automation, automated decision making, it's all these kind of terms floating around. And I mean, it's still an ongoing struggle about how we define these terms and what the implications are. And I mean, there are legal issues with it. If we define it as a product, then we might not get access. If we define it as public access or public records, we get access to the source code. And especially in Sweden, this is very, very important, and it has a very broad right to public records, the journalists and citizens in general. But it's also part of what I call the mundanization, making technology something that we relate to on an everyday level, is that we develop definitions that we kind of can understand and reduce complexity. Because AI is still often presented to us as something that's very complex. You can't understand it if you haven't studied computer science, if you're not a programmer or coder yourself. But at the same time, we have to live with the consequences. But so we part of the struggle, part of the implementation of technology is also developing these kind of everyday understandings of technology, where we highlight certain aspects and why we forget other aspects. And there I have looked into the Trelleborg case, how different stakeholders are taking part in this negotiation process. And journalists are one part, and then we have also activists, but also unions that are representing, for example, caseworkers that are in fear of being automated and disappearing, losing their jobs and so on, that are all participating in the struggle of trying to understand what these technological changes are actually about and what the consequences are for the society.
And one of the things that you were talking about earlier on is quality control, right? This is what can be a very complex system from start to finish, from the moment, as Judith was saying, when you decide to use an automated decision-making system until the final results. What do you think about the new initiatives that are emerging to offering from private companies, but also from within public administration, the calls for auditing of the algorithms and auditing and services are being offered in this sense? Is that the right approach? Do we want to audit algorithms? Should we include quality control at an earlier stage? What do you think, for example?
So one important thing is that when you start using technology like skyrocketing, I would not say exponential, but people like to say exponential, the number of problems will grow the same way. So we need to remember that. If we use something like this, the number of problems will have the same thing. And then we cannot audit all problems. It's unfeasible. We cannot scale. That has to be a human audit. So we have just a problem with how many things you have to audit. Second, most of the time, the known audits that exist today that are published were done against the will of the company. So basically, this, I don't know, for example, the first one that was headline news like Compass, ProPublica, that was against the will of the company. Everything that you try to do with the big internet companies is against the will of the company. So you have to do it with public data. Imagine what you can find if you can do it from the inside. At Northeastern, there is a very good auditing team, like a research, and this year they published the first paper that has basically the help of the company that they were auditing, that was published in March. This was a hiring company in the US that were using video and other things to detect how good the person was. There are some ethical issues there, but they were trying to basically audit if they fulfill the recommendations of the US government on gender. It's not exactly gender parity, but they recommend some balance. And this may become a law with Biden. And the good thing is that they agreed to publish the paper before starting the audit. So even if the audit will fail, they will publish. But the audit, they were successful, but it shows how you do a real audit. And you need to basically have access to everything, and they did only the technical part, because also, as Judith was saying, we need to do the social auditing, like what the users think, what the people that is impacted think, what the government thinks, and that's usually not done, and that's more like a social part of the audit. So if we have to do that at scale, I think it's not possible to do that. I would prefer to have like some kind of certification of the process. You can't certify the model changes too much. Some kind of certification of the process, where at least I know that the things were done in a reasonable way, so we don't need to audit every algorithm.
I think I would like to give the word to Judith, because I think she has the most and best ideas and the best perspective on this. I just want to mention one suggestion that was made by a Swedish union to install an algorithm ombudsman, like a central function within the
Only one.
Well, it would be, a whole agency with different people, but which would do the transparency aspect, which would contribute to registers and kind of survey what is going on, but also where citizens could actually address issues and problems with algorithmic automation, for example.
So we have a critical vision of this new industry, because I think that to prevent the harmful potential of the algorithms, we have to prevent various steps before that they launch. The auditing is the final step. So I think that we need to think or to conceptualize algorithms like a socio-technical artifact, not only in the technical vision. So for me, in auditing process, the main question is who decides which parameters have to be taken in account. Today we have seen in other panels that there are like 20 or 30 different proposals for AI ethics. So without this framework or shared framework, we can affront auditories. So for me, it's a good tool. It has to be like the quality control that we do on software. But the main question is it's in the decision of applying an algorithm to something. I don't know if Cecilio wants to.
No, my point of view is there is auditing tools for software. Okay, so this is something that exists, and you can check, and it works. You can check many things, but we need some standards for that. Okay, and in order to define the standards, we need to define some metrics, some measures. And the definition of justice is not a metric. We need some metric for that. The definition of fair is not a metric. We need metrics for that. The definition of neutral is not a metric. We need metric for that. So in the moment that the measures are defined for some well-reputed organization, okay, then we can agree that they can be audited, okay? But what is happening now is that there are a lot of companies and think tanks and like mushrooms, okay, that they are starting in this moment that they want to define if one AI algorithm is ethic. They want to define if one algorithm is trustworthy. They want to define, but why there must define that? This is my question.
Do you want to answer the question?
No, I will ask another question. So maybe it's an engineer bias. I'm also an engineer. Why we need metrics for everything, right? There are some human things where cannot be measured. Like, and I prefer not to be measured. So for example, intelligence, we shouldn't measure that. And other people try to measure other things. So I think that one of the problems in mathematizing humans, we are not deterministic. We are not rational many times. So that's another step. And some people believe that neural networks or deep learning are also kind of random, but they are not random at all. So they will answer the same question. But what answered, I would say that in the Spanish AI strategy that was published last December, there is the Office of the Data. It's a kind of weird name for me, but that one should be the one that basically has this algorithmic surveillance regulation property.
So I would say that I am philosophy, so you need metrics, I need abstract concepts to explain reality. And I'm with you. We can, or fair is not a metric, justice is not a metric, so maybe we are talking about political things, not about math or optimization things. So the question is why we need to apply algorithms in things that maybe we can mathematize. I don't know if this word exists. No? Why to use them?
We are discussing about that. We are discussing about AI algorithms, so I think that we are in the right panel for that. I agree that there are several visions. Okay, I agree that finally you have one app that has many consequences. But I don't think that Coca-Cola will provide the formula for Coca-Cola. This is for sure. So you can be as transparent as you want. You can be as fair as you want. You can be as neutral as you want. You can be as used as you want. But Coca-Cola never will provide the formula for the Coca-Cola.
But Coca-Cola doesn't change, and it stays the same for all people. That's the problem. It's a very simple product.
So maybe we don't have to use private algorithms or private code.
This is a decision that you can take.
Yeah.
Yes. This is a decision. Yes.
Okay, so we just have a couple of minutes and before we lead on to the closing ceremony, and I'd just like to invite you all to share.
A question from the public? No?
We're
No,
not.
time.
Sorry, we can't. I've been given some instructions. So, I'd just like to give you a chance to give some final comments and reflections, not only on our panel, but you've been here all day. What's your takeaway message to our audience? Let's start with you, Judith.
With me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, for me, it's all this narrative question. We need to create new narratives. We need to demystify the technological thing of algorithms, and we need to put people not in the center of the design, in the center of the decision.
Okay, thank you. Cecilio?
My vision is, I think that we are like in the Plato cavern, okay? And what we are doing is to project, this is philosophy. Yeah. What we are doing is to project the social reality in one new dimension, that is technology, okay? And we are observing in this new dimension all the problems that we are having in our society. So let's try to be worried about these problems. This is okay. How they affect technology, this is okay. But the cause is not the technology. It's only one effect.
Thank you.
I guess I'm continuing. My main takeaway is that a lot of issues that we have been discussing here are actually not necessarily with the technology, but are larger societal questions, political questions, future societies that we would like to envision, where technology is only one part. It's not the solution, but it's also not only the devil or the evil, but it's embedded in larger processes that we need to consider.
Thank you.
So that was great, because then what we can do, right? On the societal level. So bias starts by acknowledging our own biases. It's very hard to be aware of that. For example, in Spanish, we don't have a word for accountability. We have to say rendición de cuentas, and that's the bias of the language. For example, people that learn English, and maybe they didn't notice, but she said manpower, and why we don't change it for human power? Bias is encoded in so many things that we don't notice. Then the first thing is we should start noticing. So train yourself. You have to train yourself to notice when you are biased and when other people is trying to discriminate you.
Thank you, Ricardo. I think that's a great message to end on. So thank you very much to all our 4 panelists today, and thank you to our audience, and over to people. Thank you very much.
Yeah.